Good afternoon, everyone. Great to see so many of you here today. Thank you to the Tech Capital for hosting us all here. On the agenda today, we are going to talk about the AI revolution that is sweeping through the global data center markets and how this is affecting locational requirements, design, investment models, and the effect that this new category of customers is having on the sector. Delighted to welcome our 5 panelists today. I'm going to introduce them myself, as we have one eye on the clock, but from right to left, Dev Gupta, CEO of the ESR-DC fund. ESR-DC is a 1.5 billion USD of equity fund backed by global sovereign wealth funds, pension funds, developing sites in Hong Kong, Tokyo, Osaka, Seoul, Mumbai, many more, partnering with operators and customers, helping them enter these markets and operate these facilities. Next up, Kai Go, CEO and co-founder of Digital Halo, the Manulife Arch Capital-backed data center operator. Kai is currently under construction of their first site east of Manila, with ambitious plans to grow across the rest of APAC. Herson Suindah, SVP in the special project and investment team at Sinar. Sinar are one of the biggest conglomerates in Indonesia, interests across financial services, real estate, telecommunications, and of course data centers, most recently with a large 60 megawatt project announced with K2 east of Jakarta. Erik Koenen, partner at Oliver WYMAN, based in Jakarta, helping data center clients, telco clients enter the Jakarta market alongside his previous job at Google Cloud. And last but not least, Nicholas, CEO of the Brookfield-backed DCI, data center operator across 3 different markets, Australia, New Zealand, South Korea, 10 data centers or sites, and 140 megawatts, I believe, to be built out. So previously managing director of SCT in North Asia. Thank you very much to our panelists for joining us. In terms of the state of the market right now, things are generally very positive in the data center sector. You know, a record 1,400 megawatts of take-up in the key major markets this year, generally low vacancies and power constraints driving increasing co-location rental tones on behalf of data center operators. Much of this recent activity has coincided with the emergence of AI, so record take-up levels, ChatGPT's rise to 100 million users, the quickest in history, and then having to pause sign-ups due to capacity constraints. Mark Ganzi reporting this is going to be a 38 gigawatt opportunity by the end of the decade. Alphabet mentioning AI 64 times in their 60-minute earnings call. It's the talk of the town, and whilst it's been around for a while, it's certainly been in the shadows. That's no longer the case. So delighted to have this panel to shed some light on this. So Nicholas, in terms of AI's penetration in APAC at the moment, where does Asia sit in comparison to the US and Europe? It's clear that the US are, large AI-style leases are being executed. How does APAC compare?
Yeah, thanks, Fred. I think when I think simplistically about the AI capacity, I would sort of break it up into serving and learning. From a serving perspective, I think a lot of the capacity that's been taken up recently has been from hyperscalers who are sort of thinking that at some point in the future there's going to be a huge demand for sort of AI products, tools and services and technology that needs to sit within existing sort of cloud regions and that's sort of latency sensitive. And so at the moment the serving aspect is really driving a lot of the growth in APAC, and there's been huge amounts of take up in Tokyo, in Malaysia, in Australia, and I think that's going to continue sort of driving the growth in the near term. From a learning perspective, this is where I think we're talking about the machine learning side of it. It's certainly not as latency sensitive, it's not as, redundancy is not as important. But I think, having been in the industry for a while, and I think Chris mentioned it before about, bite sizes, the industry has evolved from retail data centers to wholesale data centers. At one point in time, some of you will remember the acronym MTDC, or multi-tenanted data centers, where you had, cloud customers across multiple floors. That then sort of evolved to hyperscale data centers and hyperscale campuses. And I think the operators that were very singularly focused on hyperscalers have done very well. I think as the industry continues to evolve, my sense is where we'll probably need to get to is an AI-focused data center operator. The sort of paradigm that needs to shift, I think, in terms of finding land, getting access to significant amounts of power, and its multitudes of what we're talking about today, actually being able to sort of manage the supply chain, manage the conversation with the customer around it. So it can't just be, you know, build it and then we'll come and talk to you. So all of that, I think, is yet to come, and I think as and when it comes, that will really change the dynamic of growth in terms of AI here in APAC.
Thank you very much. On that same train, Kai, what will actually be the key driver behind site selection going forward? I mean, in the past, people have been led by the AZ model, so it's been relatively straightforward in terms of areas, not necessarily actually acquiring the right site with power. But how's that going to change now with this new wave of demand?
So when you talk about AI, there are two main types of workloads. There's like machine learning and inference. I think it's a bit clearer on the machine learning side. Generally, what we're looking for is large amounts of power, and as Nick said, not particularly latency sensitive. So I think a big part of it will be driven by total cost of ownership. You want a location where there's abundance of power. Ideally, it's green, it should be cheap, and latency isn't a big consideration. At the same time, you see that data residency, data sovereignty is important. So what is likely to happen is that in each of the major economies, each of the major markets like China, India, Japan, Australia, you're probably going to have specific locations, cities within each of these countries that would be suitable for machine learning. So for example, if you talk about Japan, places like Kyushu, Hokkaido, potentially it could be locations. In Australia, there have been some discussions about Perth. On the inference side, I think it's a bit less clear. I think the jury is still out. There have been some discussions where people have been discussing that AI workloads have to be co-located with cloud workloads. So that essentially means that existing AZs will expand in size. But yet at the same time, you have seen different architectures. For instance, Google, they just made an announcement on Gemini, I think a couple of days ago, where one part of the Gemini architecture is that the Gemini Nano it runs inference as well, but this is really on your mobile devices. So not so clear at this point in time.
And I might bring Erik in there just to provide a bit more detail on the distributed infrastructure in somewhere like Jakarta.
Yeah, sure. Thanks for the question. If the facts are, if the stats are right, 70% of data consumption is done on mobile phone in Indonesia. And Indonesia being such a fast, wide country with different infrastructure levels, the moment AI is starting to play a role in more operational procedures, potentially self-driving cars, IoTs, etc., it's becoming important to get latencies under 0.2 microseconds, and that requires a much more distributed architecture in order to serve the results. In terms of, and this is an Indonesian perspective from my experience at Google and now at Oliver Wyman, but the two factors drove where machine learning was being done in Indonesia. The first one is that processing costs for hyperscalers is much cheaper in the United States than it is in Indonesia, and so we see local clients sending overnight their data to the United States to run their machine learning algorithms there. And the second one is the availability of data scientists, machine learning talent. It's still we're still at the start of the journey in Indonesia, and as a consequence, most of the talent that serves Indonesia is still based in Singapore or India to serve the local time zone.
Thank you. So, Dev, with these new locational requirements, is your life getting harder in terms of second guessing where the cloud are going to go and getting there first?
So slightly different perspective. I think, first of all, AI may be probably little less understood or misunderstood. According to very early estimates, just cloud adoption and AI, it's thought that it will add about $3 trillion in EBITDA to the top 2,000 companies of the world. If you break that $3 trillion down, and that's from now to 2030, so in the next 6-7 years, if you break that $3 trillion down, about 10% is just digitization of legacy systems. You're moving from paper to digital. That's still $300 billion. Hasn't happened yet globally. About 20% is, maybe 20 to 25% is IT innovation, and the fact that with AI, you're able to migrate from legacy to cloud in a much cheaper and a faster and efficient way. So migration and remediation, it's about 20%. So that, none of that has happened, or a lot of that hasn't happened. We then go to the third layer, which is the $2 trillion behemoth, which is innovation because of AI. You're going digital first. Born digital companies that are built on AI from the day one, and innovation because of that. I mean, Moderna and the mRNA vaccine is a great example, right? We got a vaccine in about 4 months from the day they started, and it was built on a public cloud data center, not even a in-house compute capacity. So I think that wave and the pervasiveness of just cloud adoption is something that we still think AI will further or enhance or increase the pace of that. And that will bring a lot of new innovation, that will bring a lot of new ROI. And companies are now starting to realize that the optimal place where they actually start to make money is about 40 to 50% of their systems being on cloud, right? Asia is still at that cusp. Asia, to now start answering the question, hasn't reached the point. US, Europe are probably 60, 70%. 80% is the optimal when you really have the maximum ROI. Asia is at 45. So just going above that cusp, a lot of Asian companies will start to realize the power of cloud and therefore power of AI. What that means, I think, is clearly unabated growth for the next 5, 7, 8, 10 years. It will probably lead to some amount of polarization, is our thinking. You will have much larger scalable campuses, as Kai mentioned, who would be 150, 200, 500 megawatts. And then of course you'll have your 50, sub 50. And that will probably be core cloud and AI inferencing in one basket. There is probably very little differentiation. Learning would be the 60 kilowatt racks, 120 kilowatt racks at different floor loadings, at very different floor to ceiling heights with very different cooling requirements. So you'll see those two products becoming more prevalent.
Thank you, Dev. Herson, I want to bring you in here to talk more about Sinar mass in the local market. Clearly, if this huge wave of demand coming down the pipe in Asia, in terms of being able to, the benefits of having a local partner on the ground, lots of operators have already seen it, but for this new wave of customers, how can businesses like yours aid their scalability and speed to enter the Jakarta market?
Yeah. So I think before I answer that, let me just clarify one thing. You mentioned about K2. So maybe it's not clear to everybody, but probably some of you understand that the way Sinar Mas group is actually structured today. We actually have 4 chairmen running their own verticals. One of those verticals is Sinar Mas Land. The other ones are our pulp and paper business, financial services, but also another pillar under my chairman actually, which is mostly telco, which is including Smartfren, one of the 4 telco operators, mobile network operators in Indonesia today, palm oil plantation, and some digital infrastructure businesses, including fiber and satellite. Okay, so just to clarify, the K2 transaction was actually done under the Sinar Mas land vertical. So, and I think, I'm representing the part of the business that is more telco and digital infrastructure side. So don't ask me about K2 deal, I have no idea. There will be K2, I think there's a representative from K2 here, so you can ask him later. But I think, look, I think from the perspective of the business that I help oversee, which, like I said, includes some of the critical digital infrastructure pieces. Telco is one. We invested into one of the largest fiber companies in Indonesia today. We also invested into a satellite company. And when we start looking at the data center space, and I don't know if you've been following this story, 2021, SmartFriend actually signed a huge MOU to be able to develop one of the largest platform for data centers in Indonesia, and that's what we're actually going to be rolling out. So when we start looking at that, we look at it from a few different angles. Looking at, if you look at the whole infrastructure, AI or whatnot, right? Starting from the cloud all the way to what we call the eyeballs, right? And the layers of infrastructure needed there, including what we call metro data center and obviously the edge data center, right? Edge is something that a lot of people have been talking about. When we start looking at all that infrastructure, what we believe the AI generation will require, especially not just AI, but we are talking about generative AI. It would be not just cloud, not just edge, but it's actually a hybrid of the three layers that I just talked about, right? Cloud, metro, and edge. And I think the underlying infrastructure beyond just the data center obviously is connectivity, right? So I think, yes, I think if you look at, there's obviously a lot of data center operators entering the Indonesia market the last 5-6 years. And a lot of them, when they look at local partners, what do they look for? Somebody who can actually help them with land acquisition, getting power. Yes, connectivity, but I think you also need to understand that a lot of the barriers to entries in a lot of other markets, in Indonesia, those are not actually barriers to entry, right? Land is abundant. Power, there's excess supply in Indonesia today, technically speaking. Fiber, there's quite a number of fiber operators or companies out there that we can work with. But I think if I were one of the DC operators getting into Indonesia, I would ask maybe a couple of things. One is, can I actually get a partner where it's sort of like a one-stop shop, right? Because I think the importance of a partner, a local partner, is essentially somebody who can help you connect the dots. Not just being able to individually supply you with certain things, but to be able to connect the dots, right? Because that's the complexity of building anything in Indonesia today, right? You can always hire a consultant, the expert for each specific field, but you got to be able to connect all the dots when you start developing, number one. Number two, if you look at Indonesia geographically, if you basically copy and paste sort of the infrastructure that you have in other markets, where it's a vast piece of land, and all you have to do is basically connect fiber from point A to point B, that doesn't always work in Indonesia, right? Because it's an archipelago. How about connecting point A to point B, going through mountains and oceans, right? And that's the reason I think the way we think about it is quite simply, you connect through the ground, the sea, but also you have probably to be able to connect over the space, right? So I think connectivity is actually very important, but also having somebody who can actually connect the dots, having a lot of those under one control, and a little bit of self promotion. Luckily we are one of those people who actually have all these different pieces within our portfolio.
Thank you. Nicholas.
I was just going to make a point. I totally agree with what Herson said around partnerships. I think before DCI, I spent 8.5 years at STT GDC, and STT GDC took a very partnership-led approach. I think particularly, that there was a comment earlier about, if you go and partner with or you go and get power from PLN, you still can't control where that sort of power comes from. I think as the industry continues to evolve, I think, if we're all data center practitioners and AI practitioners, I think we also need to think of ourselves as sustainability practitioners. I think that sustainability angle is very, very important, and fundamentally a lot of that sits with the power companies, and even starting some of those discussions and partnerships with the power companies is potentially another angle where this will slowly evolve to as well.
Thank you, Nicholas. Moving on to AI-based design, again, hugely discussed topic, with a lot of variation in terms of where people think it will end up. Dev, from your perspective, in terms of the plethora of sites that you have on the design stage or under construction, how can you build in an element of flexibility to actually sort of attest to these changes that we might see or may not?
Yeah, I think one key thing is scalability, because what AI would need is to be able to grow in the same location. Yes, you're right, it's not latency dependent, so it can be outside of city centers, it can be, somewhere north of Osaka or something like that, where it's not really a location where there's a lot of consuming population, but you still need to scale at that location. So having the right size of land for somebody to come in and say, I can do 100, 150 megawatts in a single site. Then comes obviously power. So you have to be able to get that power and be able to scale that power at the right voltage. Again, critical. Because of the amount of or the quantity of power you need. And sustainability, I think Nick brings up a very important point. I think workloads that are of this nature are not super mission critical on any given day, should be run on sustainable power. Now, whether that's available and in what percentage of the power coming in would be that is going to be very, very critical, I think. We owe it to the planet more than anything else. I guess the third thing would be fiber and connectivity. So you see fiber sort of moves west to east in any country or globally, right? There's a lot of push because now there is fiber from Perth to Sydney. And that Perth fiber connects to Asia, connects to Europe. So it's that, circling the world kind of thing. So working along that fiber, it may not be super close, but it needs to be somewhere there so that you still have the milliseconds that you need. So I guess that's one paradigm shift. The second one is making the data center future-proof. I don't think people know what it means for inferencing and learning workloads to coexist in the same building. Do you need 25 kilonewtons per meter square floor loading? Do you need 7 meters floor or 8 meters floor to ceiling heights? If you need on-chip cooling, then what is the infrastructure from a real estate perspective required to fulfill that? Very early days. There's going to be 10 other parameters which nobody knows about today. Yeah.
Yeah. No, on the sustainability point, there was an article in DCD, 3 days ago. The title was "AI will burn the world unless radical action is taken." So it's some aggressive headlines out there. But Kai, on the design point, I know your site, Manila, there's an existing building there already, which is being refitted. What are the strengths of using existing assets? Is there an AI model there? Interested to hear your thoughts.
This is something that we have considered in our design for the retrofit. We do recognize that the wave is coming. You see a lot more in the US and Europe, not quite in Asia yet, but it will come eventually. And so there's a need to be able, for your design to be able to cater for it. I think there are two main characteristics of AI DC. I think one is power density is going to go up. And then second is that the throughput between the servers are going to be pretty high. So for example, right, when you talk about DGX, NVIDIA DGX H100 server system, you put 4 in a rack. The power density will go up to about 40 kilowatts. And if you go talk about next generation, it's going to be way higher, the Grace Hopper chips, right? What is done right now in traditional air-cooled data centers is you have racks and lots of space in between, so that airflow can still take away the heat. But that is not ideal for machine learning, because in machine learning, you need your racks to be close together so that you can optimize the network configuration so that the servers can talk to each other faster, right? Simplistically. So what we have done is we have put in place certain flexibilities in our design to allow us to reconfigure the data hall floor to allow us to implement direct-to-chip liquid immersion. We have also done a couple of things. We do recognize that power efficiency is going to be quite important, so we have taken a distributed redundant approach in terms of power. This, the good thing about this is it will allow us to increase the utilization of our UPS. We have also put in place real-time sensors to measure the power throughput into the servers. On the cooling side, what we have done is we have put in place, for instance, mesh sensors, and we are able to automate the cooling depending on how the sensor readings, so that we optimize the cooling. Yeah.
Thank you, Kai. Just moving on to, I mentioned it in the introduction, this new sort of category of customers that are entering the space. And an example I want to use is our co-location advisory team the other day had a requirement through from a company, was looking for unknown company, new AI venture-backed company. It had 8 employees and was looking for a 12 megawatt deployment. So, you know, there's new customers entering the space. You know, want to start the question asking Nicholas how operators such as DCI are viewing these new venture-backed companies, and then move that on to Dev and ask about how the banks, you know, potentially may look at these things in comparison to the previous contracts that they enjoy financing.
Yeah, I think thanks for the question, Fred. You know, I think one of the things that we're seeing, and you know, so DCI is part of the sort of Brookfield empire of data center businesses, and at the moment what we're seeing in the US and what we're hearing from some of our colleagues in the US is that there are a lot of these sort of experimental AI businesses set up from, you know, a couple of guys who've left NVIDIA and doing a whole bunch of, you know, interesting things. I think as the industry continues, and what we're hearing as well is power requirements are significant, but the tenure of contract is also very low because it's very experimental and it's still in very much an infancy stage. Look, I think the short answer is it hasn't quite made its way here to APAC at the moment. You know, I think we'll need to sort of assess things on a case-by-case basis, but from what I can see and what I can gather from the US at the moment, the power requirements are significant, but the contract terms are also a lot shorter. And for some specific loads as well, they're even saying, you know, don't worry about N plus N, don't even worry about N plus 1, just give us N so that we can get some chips in and start doing some of this experimental work.
Yeah, I guess state of evolution, right? Banks in Asia are still waking up to the idea of a speculative build for core cloud adoption. They would like to only lend to projects that have, you know, an anchor customer, if not the entire capacity spoken for. To try and move from there to a situation where you have these new age operators, and in the US and in general North America, there are several now. You know, I recently met one. They bought land speculatively in Canada, built 120 megawatt data, or started building 120 megawatt data center speculatively, full AI, 60 kilowatt racks only. And before the core and shell was complete, they leased out the entire capacity. So, but that's there, not yet here. To echo Nick's point, I think it's going to be a reconfiguration of mindsets of some of the larger banks in Asia who are generally risk averse, who generally don't like to fly closer to the wind, and but it's something that they have to do. But I think baby steps, right? Step one is let us get money leverage for buying land speculatively, building an asset speculatively, even acquiring some MEP speculatively, because long leads are now running into 2 years. Knowing fully well that if a data center is built, capacity gets taken, it's a question of time. So once the banks get to that point, I think the next step would be to look at some of these newer age operators, but not yet.
Thank you, Dev. Nicholas, I want to touch a bit on what you introduce yourself with in terms of the change of the data center operator. And Herson, maybe you can add a bit here in terms of actually how a traditional operator, it will not look the same over the next 5 years in terms of what the customers are requiring and actually what the USP for a data center operator is representing this new category of customers.
Well, look, I think going back to the same idea I mentioned earlier, if you look at the architecture of AI and Gen AI, and I think the world is still trying to figure out what is the best architecture out there. But I think in general, people believe that it's probably going to be a hybrid, cloud, metro, and edge, an edge model. Then I think there's two schools of thoughts here. There are people who are basically saying, okay, bigger ecosystem, but we sort of know what is required in terms of the critical elements that go into that infrastructure. Then I'm going to be the best in X, Y, and Z, right? The other school of thoughts is, because it's now getting a lot more integrated, then you gotta be a lot more integrated in the way you operate, the way you design, the way you develop, and probably the way you operate and invest as well, right? So, I personally have seen both models. I think if you look at a lot of the digital infrastructure funds out there looking at the data center, they're not just building data centers, right? They're looking at the whole value chain, essentially. They have the data center, the big cloud data center, they have the edge data center, they have the fiber, all the way down to the microcells, right? But the way they look at it, I think, if you're a fund, then you look at it mostly, as a portfolio, as a diversified portfolio. Every piece that you own in that portfolio, they try to optimize it independently. I think for us, the way we look at it, just because we are not a fund, we are essentially a strategic player. And our position is in a sense that if I'm the local Indonesian partner / expert here, right? Do I go out and actually acquire all of these different pieces of knowledge and skill set and optimize all of them, which is going to be probably close to impossible, right? So the way we think about it is that, look, we understand we understand the big picture. Why don't I maybe do partnerships, right? Do I partner with the best operator? Do I partner with the best operator, fiber, DC to DC fiber, what have you, right? Because there's a lot of really good specialists out there. Let me be the one that, like I said earlier, be the one that is going to be able to help them connect the dots here, right? I think that is the sort of the school of thoughts that we have we have in mind here. At least the way we look at the next 5 years. The funny thing though is the more you learn about all of these, the more you are unsure about what the next 5 years are going to look like, right? And I don't know if you videotape this session, maybe even next year you replay it, or might be 50% wrong, right? But at least that's the way we look at it. I think from the investor's perspective as well, to Dev's comment about future proofing. There's theoretical limit to what you can actually future proof probably, right? We are in the process of thinking about, let's say, a new greenfield data center, just like what probably Kai is going through right now with his new development. If you think about the ratio of your data hall versus your MEP floor space, that ratio is just going to probably dramatically changing, right? So you're not going to use as much data hall for the same capacity, but guess what? Your MEP room is going to be significantly larger, right? So how do you do that, right? Floor loading capacity is the other one. But also, if you look at what's coming out there, I don't know what you guys are seeing. If you look at most of the racks in Indonesia today, if you look at it from colo perspective, they are probably running at maybe 4 to 6 kilowatt per rack in general. Hyperscalers running around 10 to 15, but we've seen things coming in at 30, 40, 45. You Google it, people are starting to talk about 100 kilowatts per rack, right? So how do you prepare for all of that? I think the way we look at it right now, from our own investment underwriting, is it all comes down to what is your investment horizon? Can you actually get a long-term contract to be able to justify that investment? But look, 5 years beyond, all bets are off probably. And we're not even talking. I think the topic is about AI, and the way we also think about AI in the realm of everything that is going on in the world. AI obviously is disruptive, but it is disruptive in a software space. We haven't even talked about the disruption in the hardware space with quantum computing, for example, right? Which is actually, if ChatGPT is what I would call the iPhone moment of AI, because it's not a new technology. Quantum computing is a completely different animal. It's going to change, from the infrastructure perspective. It's not even, it's not a gradual change, right? It's a significant jump from the classical computing infrastructure that we have today into something that is completely different. So we're not even, going there, right? Obviously, but a lot of challenges, but also exciting opportunities. The good thing about the Indonesia market, when we look at it, I don't think we are not the pioneer. So we can always learn from what other people are actually doing in other market. But the thing that we are actually watching is how fast those changes are and how quick we can actually react to it. Because you're in a situation where you're an investor, your inherent investment capability is a long cycle investment, but then your customers' speed of change is significantly different than what you can actually deploy.
Yeah.
Right.
Thank you, Herson. I think we're about to get attacked on the timing, so if there's any questions from the audience for our speakers, please do fire away. If not, there's certainly no myths left in the AI space. So I'm going to thank all our speakers and everyone for attending, and do find us afterwards if you have any further questions, but probably time for some lunch.